Starship is surging toward Flight 12 with major progress this past week, just as top experts call its moon plans fundamentally broken, and new evidence sharpens the picture of what really caused the Booster 18 explosion. Let's dive into the details. SpaceX is moving at full throttle towards Starship Flight 12, currently targeting as early as the first quarter of next year. The upper stage for this mission, the first next-generation Block 3 Starship, Ship 39, was fully stacked inside Megabay 2 weeks ago and is now awaiting cryogenic proof testing, which will validate tank integrity, weld quality, and structural margins under liquid nitrogen loads. At the same time, a dedicated ship test article, Test Tank 18, is undergoing structural qualification at Massey's test site. This tank is built specifically to validate the design upgrades introduced in the Block 3 ships and has already completed 3 multi-hour structural stress tests. These tests push the tank to extreme pressure and load conditions to map strain behavior, identify failure margins, and verify whether the new structural reinforcements, weld techniques, and material transitions perform as predicted. The data gathered directly feeds back into final design refinements for upcoming flight vehicles. Since Ship 39 has been stacked for nearly a month but has not yet entered cryogenic testing, SpaceX may be intentionally waiting for the Test Tank 18 data to finalize any last-minute structural improvements before committing Ship 39 to its own proof campaign. This approach reduces the risk of failure requiring ship design rework and also causing major delays. But it's also possible that Ship 39 could proceed to cryo-testing independently before the Test Tank 18 campaign fully concludes. On the booster side, Booster 19, Ship 39's partner for Flight 12, is currently being assembled inside Megabay 1. Its liquid oxygen tank section is now fully stacked, with only the aft dome remaining to be installed. The methane transfer tube was installed this past week, marking a major internal integration milestone. Crews are now installing raceways and associated plumbing systems along the booster's exterior. Once these systems are complete, the aft dome will be installed to close out the oxygen tank section, while methane tank stacking proceeds in parallel. After both propellant tanks are fully integrated, Booster 19 will enter its standard qualification flow, beginning with cryogenic proof testing. While SpaceX pushes aggressively toward Flight 12, Starship Lunar Lander is again under heavy fire from experts and policymakers. On December 4th, during a U.S. House Space and Aeronautics Subcommittee hearing, former NASA Administrator Michael Griffin delivered one of the most severe technical indictments yet of NASA's Artemis program and its reliance on SpaceX's Starship as the human landing system. He argued that the risk chain begins before the mission even leaves Earth, with the need to assemble and fuel the lunar lander in orbit using large-scale cryogenic propellant transfers, an operation never been demonstrated at the scale required for crewed lunar flight. He pointed out that each landing attempt could demand well over a dozen tanker launches, all needing flawless rendezvous, docking, and sequential fuel transfer. That fragility, he noted, carries forward through lunar transit and orbital operations, where the entire architecture depends on sustained cryogenic control without boil-off and precise autonomous docking with Orion in lunar orbit, with zero room for failure. By the time the crew transfers and descends to the surface, Griffin cautioned that any upstream fault propagates directly into the landing and return risk.
Why exactly do you think it won't work? Why you are recommending we cancel this and go a different direction?
The quick bottom line is that an architecture which requires a high multiple number of refueling flights in low Earth orbit uses a technology that has not yet ever been demonstrated in space is very unlikely to work. The length of time required for the Earth departure ship to remain in low Earth orbit almost guarantees that the propellant you have loaded will boil off before it can fully be used.
Okay.
And the requirement of the lander to occupy lunar orbit waiting for the crew for 60 to 90 days guarantees that the fuel will boil off. Oh, I do not see a way with the current technology we have to overcome those problems, and therefore we should not pursue that line of approach.
Considering these risks and lack of proven tech, Griffin called for canceling Artemis 3 and the missions that follow, in favor of a full architectural reset towards simpler, Apollo-style direct landing strategies.
In my 2024 statement, I submitted a system architecture for human lunar return that could be implemented with systems available today or near term. Others have also suggested alternative system architectures for human lunar return missions. However, NASA 2 successive presidential administrations and the Congress that oversees them have so far chosen to continue on a path that cannot work and which, even if it could, poses a level of crew risk that should be considered unacceptable. The Artemis III mission and those beyond should be canceled, and we should start again, proceeding with all deliberate speed.
This is not the first time the Starship lunar lander has drawn criticism, as in recent months, it has also drawn growing scrutiny from NASA officials, including Acting Administrator Sean Duffy, over delays.
Now, SpaceX had the contract for Artemis III. The problem is they're behind. They pushed their timelines out, and we're in a race against China. The president and I want to get to the moon in this president's term.
Former NASA chiefs Charlie Bolden and Jim Bridenstine also voiced doubts about whether the current Starship-based architecture can enable a lunar landing before China's first crewed mission.
This is an architecture that no NASA administrator that I'm aware of would have selected had they had the choice. But it was a decision that was made in the absence of a NASA administrator in the last administration.
These concerns have prompted NASA to consider reopening the lunar lander competition, potentially expanding contracts to include Blue Origin's Blue Moon lander, which is already slated for Artemis V.
So I'm going to open up the contract. I'm going to let other space companies compete with SpaceX, like Blue Origin.
In response to the mounting criticism, SpaceX, in October, released a detailed technical update outlining progress on its lunar Starship program, stating it has completed 49 major milestones spanning subsystem design, infrastructure readiness, and mission operations, many ahead of schedule. These include Earth-based simulations of docking and propellant transfer systems, validation of Orion-to-lander docking architecture for future lunar orbit operations, crew training using pressurized EVA suits, rigorous testing of the lunar landing propulsion system and landing leg hardware, comprehensive failure mode analysis, and implemented mitigation strategies for propellant boil-off, transfer instability, and long-duration cryogenic storage. I've already covered these milestones one by one in detail in a dedicated video, which is linked in the description. SpaceX also laid out its upcoming test sequence and reaffirmed confidence in meeting the Artemis timeline, while noting that a simplified mission architecture aimed at enabling a faster and safer lunar return is under internal assessment. Even so, criticism of the Starship-centric lunar strategy continues to intensify at the highest policy levels, turning Artemis into a growing fault line between aggressive reusability-driven innovation and risk-averse, schedule-driven competition with China. Back at Starbase, progress continues across several key systems at Pad 2. The launch mount is now nearly complete, with all major hardware installations finished. What remains are the protective access doors for the 20-booster hold-down clamp arms, which are currently exposed and awaiting enclosure. Crews have begun installing the doors one by one, which are designed to close immediately after the arms retract at liftoff to shield internal mechanisms from plume and debris. Testing of the water deluge system has resumed after a multi-week pause, with recent runs again activating only the flame trench deluge zone, forcing high-pressure water through the trench beneath the pad. The long-awaited full-flow activation, where both the trench and deck arrays operate together for thermal and acoustic suppression during super-heavy ignition, remains pending. The full activation test will follow once the hold-down arm doors are fully installed. On the launch tower, 2 hydraulic actuators that drive the arms were removed last week, following the earlier removal of the hydraulic accumulators that store and regulate the high-pressure fluid used to power their motion. The actuators have now left the site, indicating replacement rather than repair, likely because earlier arm tests exposed insufficient force, response time, or damping issues. Beyond these systems, the rest of Pad 2's infrastructure has seen minimal visible change over the past week. With installations wrapping up and final checkouts underway, Pad 2 remains on track to be fully operational by January for Booster 19 static fire testing. A short distance away, Pad 1 demolition continues. The remaining lower stubs of the launch mount support legs have now been mechanically crushed and cleared, fully exposing the concrete foundation slab. Crews have also begun dismantling the water deluge system, starting with the cylindrical high-pressure nitrogen tanks that drive water flow from the main reservoirs to the deluge plates. The water delivery piping connecting the tanks to the deluge system is now being removed as well, beginning with the above-ground feed lines, before moving to the buried sections. Once this is complete, the water discharge plates will be removed, followed by deep foundation excavation to extract the load-bearing pile system. Removing these piles is required before excavation can begin for the new flame trench, one of the most labor-intensive phases of the rebuild. Work on the Pad 1 launch tower was minimal this past week, following the earlier trimming of its arms as part of the ongoing refurbishment to match Pad 2 geometry. Across the tank farm, crews are stripping out legacy pumps, heat exchangers, piping, and auxiliary tanks as ground systems transition to a full Block 3 configuration. The methane reclamation tanks were removed and shipped back to the port of Brownsville, likely bound for future reuse, potentially at Kennedy Space Center. These tanks are part of the methane reclamation system, where boiled-off methane vapor is first compressed and reliquefied using dedicated compressors and heat exchangers, before being temporarily stored in reclamation tanks and then routed back to the main cryogenic storage tanks. Once demolition is complete, Pad 1 will be rebuilt as a near duplicate of Pad 2, enabling dual-pad operations for higher launch cadence. Finally, Booster 18 has now been fully scrapped at Massey's test site, with both the aft and forward domes transferred to the production yard for detailed post-failure analysis. You can see visible fracture lines on the chine region, where the COPVs were installed, which further supports our previous conclusion that the Booster 18 explosion was triggered by a COPV failure. For a full structural breakdown of the incident, refer to my dedicated analysis video linked in the description. Now, let's discuss the latest updates from the world of science and technology. The U.S. Senate Commerce Committee has advanced Jared Isaacman's nomination as NASA Administrator to the full Senate for a final confirmation vote, marking the second time he has cleared the panel after an abrupt withdrawal earlier this year. Isaacman, the billionaire founder and CEO of Shift4 Payments, is also a leading figure in commercial human spaceflight, having commanded the all-civilian Inspiration4 mission and the first private spacewalk mission, Polaris Dawn, with SpaceX. Donald Trump first named Isaacman as his choice to lead NASA in December 2024 to succeed Bill Nelson, with priorities aligned to the Artemis lunar program. His initial confirmation hearing in April before the Senate Commerce Committee ended in a 19-9 vote, advancing the nomination to a full Senate confirmation vote. On May 31st, however, Trump withdrew the nomination following what the White House called a thorough review of prior associations amid scrutiny over Isaacman's bipartisan political donations. Many observers also speculated that the timing was influenced by mounting political fallout tied to Isaacman's close relationship with Elon Musk, as Trump's own ties with Musk deteriorated during that period. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy then assumed the role of acting NASA administrator, guiding the agency through Artemis delays and budget pressure. After several months in limbo, Trump renominated Isaacman on November 4th, following weeks of renewed internal deliberations. Around the same time, a leaked internal blueprint known as Project Athena surfaced, outlining plans to streamline NASA's bureaucracy, expand commercial partnerships, accelerate deep space programs, including nuclear electric propulsion, and launch a new Mars initiative called Olympus, setting political context for the renomination. The easing of the Trump-Musk rift further reduced the political risk surrounding Isaacman's ties to Musk. Support from the space community strengthened after the renomination, including a November 22nd letter signed by 36 former NASA astronauts, expanding an earlier March letter from 28, urging swift confirmation for his mission leadership and anomaly review experience. More than 40 additional endorsements followed, including from Sean Duffy and a NASA workforce petition, citing Isaacman's engineering judgment and urgency against China. At his second confirmation hearing on December 3rd, before the same Senate Commerce Committee, Isaacman faced renewed questions on conflicts of interest and NASA's direction, but encountered broad bipartisan support and no decisive opposition. He stressed urgency in beating China back to the moon, calling it the time for action, and described Project Athena as a directional framework rather than a finalized restructuring plan.
This is not the time for delay, but a time for action, because if we fall behind, if we make a mistake, we may never catch up, and the consequences could shift the balance of power here on Earth.
What is Project Athena, and do you stand by what is in that document?
Basically, ideas, thoughts on the direction of the agency, research requests. It was always something that was meant to be, refined with actual data, should I have been confirmed in it. But I do stand behind everything in the document, even though it was written 7 months ago. I think it was all directionally correct, consistent with prior testimony and my interactions with various senators.
Addressing SpaceX and Musk, he framed the relationship as strictly professional and rejected any conflict of interest.
That your relationship with Elon Musk and SpaceX would not create a significant conflict of interest for you in this role.
My relationship with Mr. Musk is the fact that I led 2 missions to space at SpaceX because it's the only organization that can send astronauts to and from space since the shuttle was retired. And in that respect, my relationship is no different than that of NASA.
On December 8th, the committee voted 18-10 to advance his nomination to the full Senate for a second time, setting up a final confirmation vote that could occur before year-end, after which Isaacman would be sworn in within weeks to lead NASA through Artemis execution and the next phase of deep space strategy. Thank you for tuning in for the latest science news and Starship updates. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, leave a comment, and share it with your friends. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode.